platform.
Okay. My name is Gwen Mahlangu-Former, a retired politician, working with the poorest of the poor people on the ground, the people that we at times forget. And that is why my topic for this afternoon is women's economic and security, women's economic and security, and also looking at justice. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all distinguished guests. We are yet at another end of Women's Month, without meaningful gains to show towards economic emancipation and the advancement of women. The pandemic also brought in more suffering to the mothers of our nations. According to data from the International Labour Organization, the ILO, women globally have suffered more job losses related to the pandemic than men. About 5% women in 2020 lost their work, as compared to 3.9% of men. Women should be treated as equal partners in building and sustaining the economy of countries. They cannot be treated as bystanders. Economic rights are fundamental human rights. Around the globe, women are more likely to live in poverty than men. More women work in vulnerable, low-paid or undervalued jobs. I will just mention a few economic security matters. One, economic injustice impacts on women and girls. There are more disparities in both paid and unpaid work, job security, and opportunities. Women also play a critical role in breaking the cycle of poverty, and therefore they need recognition. When women have sustainable incomes, they invest in their communities and families, using that income to improve the lives of their children by taking them to school, providing food and healthcare. Economically empowered women create healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable societies and families. Women, factory workers, and domestic workers face some of the worst forms of abuse. Women farmers, who are the majority of food producers, are hard hit by environmental degradation. All these are critical components of economic justice. It is of paramount importance that we increase acknowledgement of of protection of women's economic activities and their contributions. The Women and Foreign Policy Programs recently published a discussion paper on women in technology as a driver for growth in emerging economies. I was actually laughing because most of us this afternoon, women, had to face the technology problems. The paper poses a valid argument for the push for increased participation of women in the information and communication technology industries, the ICTs. As the world transitions to an increasingly digital economy with the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, many low and middle income countries face an obstacle. Most emerging economies lack qualified people, with emphasis on women, to fill critical information and communication technology jobs. A shortage that is exacerbated by the low representation of women in these industries. Increasing the participation of women in the ICT labor force would help bridge this gap. But are we ready to take full advantage of this growing sector? Are we ready to take the networks that Professor has been talking about just earlier on? Expanding women's access to ICT jobs would not only advance economic opportunities for women and their families and the communities, but it would also help address the shortage of skilled workers for these jobs and grow the digital economy. As women become increasingly active users of technology, their participation in designing and developing technological products and services will help to enhance technology's relevance for women as consumers, further boosting innovation and economic growth. There was a study done in Himalayas, India, on women's contribution to household food and economic security. And it found that a great injustice was committed when trying to quantify a man's contribution to the household versus that of a woman. This is the result of a faulty concept of participation in the labor force that does not include household or domestic work as economic activity, mainly because of the focus on use value rather than exchange value. This indicates a reason for the neglect of women's economic contributions to the household in particular and to society in general. Gender bias in intra-house allocation of resources, participation in decision-making, and time spent within and outside the house needs to be re-evaluated. While women are increasingly heading households, today's women and girls in developing countries make up 70% of the estimated 1.2 billion people living in absolute poverty, defined as living on less than $1 a day. No doubt one cause in the overrepresentation of women in poverty is the fact that land and other real property are generally considered to represent about 75% of a nation's overall wealth, and women only own an estimated 1 to 2% of all titled land worldwide. Improving the property rights of women is a matter not only of human rights and gender equality, it is a fundamental principle that underlies economic development for all people. There is an abundance of research showing that when women's income goes up, the additional income goes directly to increase household consumption. People's lives change, families' lives change because women are in a better space economically. In addition, women's lack of property rights has been increasingly linked to other development-related problems, including low levels of education, hunger, and poor health. For women, there is a linkage between rural and urban poverty. Rural women's incomes could increase if they own or control land, individually or jointly, and have the benefit of legally recognized use and inheritance rights. Ongoing exclusion of women from rural land rights pushes them towards the cities. And they do not necessarily want to leave their rural dwellings, but they are forced by circumstances to go into the cities, where they often join the increasing ranks of women-headed or women-only households in slum areas where inadequate housing is the norm and homelessness is all too common. And once they are in the big cities, women have to contend for work and compete, many of whom end up in unregulated job markets, while the bulk will seek out domestic work. And we all know what happens around domestic work. In extreme cases, the exodus would have started in a different country, in a cross-border expedition to find gainful employment. We have in South Africa, for instance, people from Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, in our country because they are looking for better lives. Many of these countries' citizens look at South Africa's cities as the remedy to their socio-economic problems. And in most cases, people do not understand that we have socio-economic problems within South Africa itself. In the case of those coming from Lesotho, the remittance sent back by those working abroad reportedly make up more than 15% of the gross domestic product, the GDP of the small country with a population of about 2 million. The global estimates on migrant workers is reported at more than 150 million workers worldwide, and so on and so forth. We know what is happening in the Americas, where Latin America provides a lot of domestic work and so on. I will try to skip a little bit because we started a little late. But we need to defend women. We need to defend their land. We need to defend their property. We need to support sustainable livelihoods for African women that are designed to impact on rights outcome and are based on effective and just business models. These interventions are what we need to gauge the progress of countries. When you bring change to the least developed inhabitants in your country, especially around food security, you obtain a win-win situation. Women are disproportionately affected by poverty in most parts of the world due to entrenched traditions, unjust economic policies, conflict, and climate change. And I think that is where we need to take the fight. If we come in, year out, International Women's Day, National Women's Day, we have all these days that are dedicated to women, but our focus is elsewhere. Our focus should be where the lowest people in our country find themselves, and we should be helping those people who are trapped in poverty. In conclusion, too often these sectors of domestic work and garment workers are not protected. They are not safe. They are not secure work. They don't have secure work environments. Let us support groups who work for the rights and protection of domestic and garment workers, especially those who work in building leadership skills in these sectors for continued protection of the employees. Climate change is affecting the lives of many of the world's women. Women farmers' security is directly linked to the ecosystem that supports the crops they grow or sell to feed their families. The plight of women cannot be spoken about many times. We all know what women are going through. A lot of women have spent years on the farms, and as a result, they don't have any education. It should be our responsibility to go and look at what happened to the urban structures of government and take those women back into the formal stream of education. But despite all this, women remain resilient. They are found in the fields. They grow food up to the boardrooms. They are affecting policies aimed at a better life for families. Women continue to flourish and achieve goals differently because of their compassion and spiritual intelligence. Women must remain committed to driving the direction of the economy despite where they find themselves. Today, we have so many female-led homes, and good children come from those homes who are leaders in the world. Given an opportunity, women will always rise. They will always rise to any occasion. A society that looks after its women and children well is a very good society. We started the month with the United Nations theme, #ChooseToChallenge. Let us challenge ourselves to go out and challenge these injustices and disparities. While we sanitize, wear masks, and wash our hands in regular intervals to openly fight the scourge of the COVID-19 pandemic, we should also educate women, speak up against inequality, and uplift women to higher offices with the same vigor to fight the pandemic of gender bias against women. Let us lift other women as we rise. Let's not rise alone and leave them behind. We should have women and girl children who would like to see us as their mentors, as examples, as the picture they see in the mirror. Let us be there, available for the less fortunate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahlangu. That is very clear. You've mentioned quite a bouquet of the impact of women in terms of economic aspects of life and how and things that are happening. But in the economic structures of pandemic right now, what has been the experience and the ear on the ground economically affected by this pandemic from the point of political aspects? Anything else, any ideas? What has been happening? Can you share with us?
I'm going to try and act like I've heard you. The line is very bad, but I think what you are saying is what is the impact of the pandemic? Did you say politically?
Yes.
Will you please
right.
repeat the question? Okay. I would say that. Are you able to hear me now?
I can hear you, though you're breaking, but you're coming through.
Okay. I think there is we all found ourselves in an environment that nobody had prepared themselves for. And that would include even governments, because all people thought that this is something that is going to be with us for a few months or so, and it's going away. And now we know that this is the new order. This is our new experience, and it has hit a number of governments, including our own government, very badly. We have lost a lot of people. We have experienced things that we never experienced before. The lockdown has been a very painful exercise itself, much as we are trying to adhere to all the protocols now, because almost everybody in South Africa and in the world knows of someone who has died or who has gone through difficult times through this pandemic. How I mentioned that women are hardest hit is that women would always have now to be at home looking after the sick people whilst they have to look and fend for their own families. It is a situation that has affected women more than men, and especially because children look forward to the mothers for survival and for food and for healthcare. So I think if I understood your question very well, yes, we have been hardest hit. We are still, even at this point in time. That is why we're communicating the way we're doing, because we're trying to be safe. So there are a lot of lessons that we can learn. Yes, in terms of technology, we have improved a lot because of the lockdown. We never used to access this available technology because we thought that we could only drive and go and see each other. But fortunately now, we are able to use what we have in front of us to communicate and be effective in interacting with other people.
All right, thank you. Last one, directed to you directly. As a retired parliamentarian on the political arena, you are home. What are you doing for women out there? Can you share with us quickly as we finish?
I haven't stopped working with women. Fortunately, I started working with women while I was fully in employment, in office. So I just continued doing what I used to do. I have established a foundation called Mahlangu Foundation, which is basically looking at feeding people and training them to have their own gardens so that they can feed themselves. And clothing them, but also teaching them how to make the clothes themselves. Right now we're in the middle of winter. We're training women on how to make blankets for themselves so that they don't come out with hands asking for people to give them, but they're also able to do for themselves. And so we have started the trainer thing so that everyone goes out and trains another person and so on and so forth. Because if we don't hold hands, this is going to be a very, very serious problem for all of us. And in addition, I also initiated an organization of retired members of parliament. So we have a pool of retired members of parliament for any expertise that you need. All the subjects that were covered by government, we have a pool there. If you need someone who is good at finances, we can. And what we are doing now, because we have been paid by government whilst we're in office, we are rendering most of the services free of charge now, because we have been put there by you people through taxes. We have been trained. We've gone to a number of conferences to sharpen our thinking, and now we've brought the thinking back into our rural areas in particular, and the townships where it is needed most.
Thank you for that. It's so helpful that the women on the platform and those that are listening can understand and know that you are still available. They can read you, can help them in any way in terms of business and politics. Thank you. But for now,